26 National Football League teams began the 1973 season as equals, for the new campaign brought a fresh start, a chance to heal last season's wounds or continue its successes. Changes in personnel and philosophies have been made during the off-season, and each team holds tight to the belief that they now have the 40 men who can win the Super Bowl. Only one team will realize this goal, but those teams that truly strengthened themselves for the new season thrived during NFL 73. Hopes for the new year actually begin just a few weeks after the old season is ended, with the NFL draft of college players. It is rare that one player, a rookie at that, can turn a franchise around in 1 year. But the seniors of 72 produced several key first-year players who greatly enhanced the fortunes of their teams. Bud Grant's Minnesota Vikings have won with defense over the past several years, but they could not win the big one, and changes had to be made. In 1972, Fran Tarkington returned to team with another 72 trade acquisition, wide receiver John Gilliam. Viking football was more exciting, but Gilliam and Tarkington were not enough. And so in 1973, the Vikings made Chuck Foreman their #1 draft pick. Minnesota now had a breakaway runner, and the Vikings at last had it all. Foreman gave balance to the Viking offense, and his threat made Tarkington to Gilliam even more dangerous. In the playoffs, Tarkington used play action to Foreman and twice struck Gilliam for scores as the Vikings beat the Redskins 27-20. Then in the conference championship, Foreman rushed for over 100 yards, and the run-conscious Cowboys saw Tarkington and Gilliam break the game open. With Chuck Foreman the only real difference in their lineup, the Vikings went from nowhere in 72 to the Super Bowl in 73. While Foreman was the final link in an already strong chain, the Bears' #1 pick, Wally Chambers, #60, was the first link in rebuilding the Chicago defense. Chambers was named NFC Defensive Rookie of the Year in 1973, while tight end Charlie Young, the Eagles' #1 draft selection, went him one better, and he was named the All-Pro tight end as a rookie. It is rare for a rookie to catapult from big man on campus to NFL All-Pro status. But as a #1 pick, it is not unheard of. The draft does, however, include some pleasant surprises. One of the Cowboys' best picks was little publicized Harvey Banks Martin, a third-round selection, who became a key man in the doomsday defense. Though not a highly touted #1 selection, Harvey Martin made good as a rookie, but not as good as Bengal Booby Clark, who was named AFC Offensive Rookie of the Year, although he was not drafted until the 12th round. But the Bengals have always had good runners. What they lacked was speed at wide receiver. When Cincinnati made Isaac Curtis their #1 pick this season, they got all the speed anyone could ask for. In the Bengals' last 2 games of the season, games they had to win, Curtis caught 5 touchdown passes. Against Cleveland, Curtis scored 3 touchdowns. And on the season's last Sunday, 2 more, as rookie wide receiver Isaac Curtis led Cincinnati to their division title. The Oakland Raiders thought all they needed was a kicker, and so made Ray Guy the only kicking specialist ever drafted in the first round. Guy's booming kicks placed him second in the NFL in punting average, and he proved to be an extremely valuable #1 pick. The Pittsburgh Steelers have used the draft to build one of pro football's most ferocious defenses. A defense that has carried them to the playoffs the past 2 years. Ten Steelers starters on defense have been gleaned from the draft. And in a game where defense wins championships, the Steelers have used the draft to build one of pro football's best. George Allen believes in defense too, but he has built his in a different way. Virtually refusing to draft, Allen led the Redskins into the playoffs with a defense that numbers more than half of its starters who have come via the trade route. Though on not as grand a scale as Allen's, several teams made key trades for the '73 season that turned their fortunes around. The Los Angeles Rams suffered through a woeful season in '72, but in just 1 year, they went from their worst record since 1965 to their best ever. 2 trades were the main reason for the Ram reversal. One bringing Harold Jackson from the Eagles, the other John Hadle from the Chargers. And the new combination tore the league apart. The trade for Jackson and 2 #1 draft picks looked like the steal of the year for the Rams, but one man made the trade anything but one-sided. Supposedly sore-armed and over the hill, quarterback Roman Gabriel found new life in Philadelphia, and he quickly quelled all doubt about his strong right arm. In 1973, Roman Gabriel threw and completed more passes for more yards than any quarterback in the NFL, and pumped new blood into the Eagles' anemic offense of 1 year ago. But Philadelphia got even more offense out of the Jackson trade. His departure made a starter out of giant 6'8" Harold Carmichael, and in his first season as a starter, all Carmichael did was lead the NFL in receptions. Using his gangly arms and legs as bludgeons, Carmichael was the only receiver in the NFL to gain over 1,000 yards. For Harold Carmichael can fly with a football. Harold Carmichael and Roman Gabriel were two new Eagle starters who vastly changed the Eagle image to that of winners in 1973. The Atlanta Falcons also made a trade for a quarterback in 1973. In Minnesota, he was Bob Lee. In Atlanta, he was General Robert M. Lee, and he very nearly led the Falcons to the playoffs for the first time in their history. For Bob Lee, a trade had meant the start of a bright career, for it gave him a chance to prove himself. Though they did not know it at the time, the Falcons had acquired an NFL starting quarterback. The Denver Broncos, on the other hand, knew what they were getting when they traded for Ray May. The ex-Colt brought with him a winning attitude. He introduced the custom of holding hands in the huddle to draw strength from each other. And to a team that had always had an offense, he preached team defense as the bylaw to becoming winners. When the Broncos beat the Chiefs last season for only the third time in 28 tries, it was fitting that a team defense effort clinched the victory. New Bronco Ray May told them they could. The Broncos did, and Denver had its first winning season ever while narrowly missing the playoffs. As defending champions, the Miami Dolphins were one team that did not have to make many changes. They had it all in '72 and kept it for '73. A young veteran offensive line set free the jet blasts of Mercury Morris, who gained nearly 1,000 yards rushing. Fullback Larry Zonka told defenses he was coming and then ran over them for over 1,000 yards. Miami also had the AFC's second leading passer in Bob Greasy, and Paul Warfield scored 11 touchdowns on just 29 receptions. Finally, there was the Dolphin D, stretching out its tentacles and swallowing up whole offenses as Miami methodically marched to the Super Bowl. For a record third straight season, the Dolphins represented the American Conference in the Super Bowl, this time against the Minnesota Vikings. Relying on a swarming defense and a grindingly efficient offense, the Dolphins were simply unbeatable. With their victory over the Vikings, the Dolphins won their second straight NFL championship. But they won it with basic, straight-ahead football. And for yet another year, the Super Bowl game bore the stamp of no-mistake conservative football. And so for the 1974 season, the game will see some well-conceived changes that will modify the look of NFL football. For the new season, the goalposts have been moved to the end line, and missed field goals from outside the 20-yard line will be returned to the line of scrimmage. In the all-important battle for field position, a miss will be costly. The punting game has been changed too. Kamikaze bomb squatters will no longer be permitted to leave the line until the ball is kicked. Given some room to get rolling, punt returners will have more opportunities to break one of football's most exciting plays. Another rule change will benefit kickoff return men. Kickoffs in 1974 will be from the 35-yard line. Fewer kicks will go out of the end zone, and the long-awaited return of the long return will result. The dominance of the defense has also brought a rule change. For in recent years, rib-popping, stifling defense has become the name of the game. Defense in the 70s has left a trail of frustrated offense in its wake, most noticeably in the passing game. Faced with a frenzy of backpedaling into the deep zones and followed by the jamming of wide receivers, quarterbacks were left with but one alternative: short passes to tight ends or backs. In fact, backs or tight ends led 15 of the 26 NFL teams in receiving. And Fred Willis of the Houston Oilers became the first back ever to lead his conference in receptions. But beginning in 1974, wide receivers will be afforded a better opportunity to get downfield. They can no longer be cut down at the line, and given a freer burst on the snap, one of pro football's most exciting positions will be back in the game plan more often. Along with the new 15-minute sudden death rule in the case of ties, pro football promises a more wide-open, exciting format in 1974. But no matter how they change the superficial features of the game, at the heart of pro football are individuals who give the game its greatest moments. Such a man is O.J. Simpson, who set NFL 73 on its ear. On the first Sunday of the 1973 season, O.J. Simpson began an odyssey unlike any other in pro football history. With 250 yards rushing, Simpson set a new single-game rushing record, but it was just the beginning. Simpson's line promised O.J. they'd get him 2,000 yards in 73. An unthinkable accomplishment. But as the yards began to pile up, the possibility loomed larger. By the 7th week, Simpson was at 1,000 yards, and he just kept right on going. On the way, O.J. surpassed Jimmy Brown's single-season rushing record. And on a snowy day in Shea Stadium, just one final step remained.
And now it's for the 2000, boys, for the 2000. That's Reggie McKenzie's ambition.
I never thought I'd never thought I'd see it. Honest. Never thought I'd see it.
They'll give him the ball all afternoon
Give
now.
him the game, the ball, the tail, the ears, and the hook. O.J. running left. O.J. 5 more. Maybe more. I don't know.
Maybe 6.
There
Maybe
it is.
He did it.
Yeah. I just wonder if the three of us at this moment fully realize what it has been our great privilege to see and broadcast and account for every inch of what has happened this season. I don't think it'll hit me for quite a while yet, but it's been a thrill for me, let me tell you, to watch O.J. Simpson run for 2,000 yards in one season.
2,000 yards in one season. That season was NFL 73. Rice Stadium, an empty shell waiting to be filled with the sounds of spectacle.
Programs here. Get your programs, Super Bowl programs, right here. Programs right here. Programs right here. Yay, Vikings! Yay! We eat dolphins for lunch and supper and dinner, all at one time. Triple power! Triple power! Go! Okay, boys!
There are times when an athletic event transcends the boundaries of sport and becomes embedded in a nation's consciousness. In 8 seasons, the Super Bowl has become such an event. The Minnesota Vikings had come this way before, only to suffer a shocking loss to the underdog Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl IV. Now, 4 years later, they stood on the threshold again. But this time, they were the underdogs. In those same 4 years, the Miami Dolphins had risen from the dregs of the sport to a world championship. Today, they would defend that championship amid the celebration of Super Bowl VIII. In the emotional fever of Super Sunday, attention naturally focused on the superstars. But trailing just behind was a supporting cast almost out of place amid all the pre-game hoopla. For an offensive lineman, lack of public recognition is an accepted fact. These are obscure men with unfamiliar faces, which disappear behind helmet cages at game time and spend the duration lost in a confusing whirl along the line of scrimmage. Few fans know exactly what offensive linemen do. Fewer still can judge their performance. Unknown names and faces dwelling in the twilight zone of the sport, nonetheless holding the key to success or failure for any team. Miami had gathered its offensive line from the league's bargain basement. All 5 had arrived as discards, then blended into a superb unit. Original Dolphin Norm Evans came in the expansion draft from Houston. Bob Kuchenberg arrived as a free agent minor leaguer. Jim Langer came on waivers from Cleveland, Wayne Moore on waivers from San Francisco, and Larry Little originally signed as a free agent with San Diego. Today, the silent preparation of these anonymous men carried special significance. Their performance would determine the outcome of Super Bowl VIII. In Super Bowl VIII, the Miami Dolphins would try to duplicate Green Bay's back-to-back world championships. But Dolphin coach Don Shula was more concerned with the task at hand. In his own words, Shula describes his plan of attack.
Going into Super Bowl VIII against the Minnesota Vikings, we felt one of the critical areas of the ball game would be the ability of our offensive line to handle Minnesota's great defensive line, and they predicate everything on coming off the ball as fast as they possibly can. Of course, they have tremendous athletes. Page is probably the best defensive tackle in football. We felt that going into the ballgame that we're going to be able to take advantage of this tremendous quickness of an Alan Page by cross-blocking. On our cross-block, our left tackle, Wayne Moore, comes down hard on Alan Page. If he's slanting to the inside, he takes himself out of the play. If he's slanting to the outside, he's coming right into the area that Wayne Moore is blocking down, and this nullifies his outside slant. Kuchenberg, on this play, lets Wayne Moore go first, and then he pulls to the outside, and he blocks out on their defensive end. The play was very effective, and it was only because the cross block was the type of blocking that should be used against these hard-charging defensive linemen. There were 2 plays that we had set up in the ball game to take advantage of the experience of a Carl Eller and a Jim Marshall. Eller and Marshall have been playing so long that every time that they read the blocking pattern of the offensive line, they react instinctively to this blocking pattern. The play starts out as a trap on the defensive end. And when the defensive end reads and reacts tough to the inside, then the ball carrier, instead of cutting inside, continues to the outside. And we made everything look like it was the inside trap play. When Eller closed to the inside, then we still were able to get the ball outside to Mercury Morris, and it was a very effective play. Another way that we were able to make the defensive lines hesitate was misdirection. The offensive linemen pull in one direction, the backs start out like they're going with the offensive lineman, and then Larry Zonka comes back with the football against the flow, and this is a effective play because it starts out like it's going in one direction, and then it ends up going in the opposite direction, hence the term misdirection.
The Dolphins had drawn first blood with a drive that approached perfection and set the tenor of what was to follow. The offensive line had been brilliant as they outmaneuvered, outflanked, outthought, and outright handled the feared purple people. Mixing cross blocks to take advantage of Page's quickness, negative influence traps to get outside Eller and Marshall, and misdirection, Miami swept 62 yards in 10 plays for a 7-0 lead. In the crucial opening confrontation, Miami's offensive line had met the foe and established a decided advantage. Now it was Minnesota's turn. The Vikings' offensive line knew they had to retaliate quickly, and they fired out with purpose. But for every Miami man handled, 2 more popped up in his place. Miami defense soars to greatness on pursuit, each man with a designated path to the ball carrier, spinning a systematic web of control, coordinated by discipline and determination. The many-headed monster of Miami pursuit was especially frustrating to Rookie of the Year Chuck Foreman, number 44. The Vikings would go the first 24 minutes of the game with only 1 first down. Miami buried Minnesota with pursuit and then turned the ball over to Bob Greasy. Much pre-game speculation surrounded Paul Warfield's pulled hamstring, so Greasy sent number 42 in motion, spreading the Minnesota secondary. With the flow going outside, Greasy dropped straight back, then looked over the middle and found tight end Jim Mandich. Having already established the running game, Jim Langer and Bob Kuchenberg switched to pass protection, double-teaming the furious rush of Alan Page, giving Greasy time to complete 4 for 4 in the first quarter. The 4th completion went to Marlon Briscoe inside the 5. Then Jim Kick replaced Mercury Morris and performed his specialty. With 2 plunges, Kick took the ball over for Miami's second touchdown. After 1 quarter of domination, the die had been hammered deep, and the Dolphins were in complete control, 14-0. Now the Dolphin defense turned to its 53. Bob Matheson carried in the 53 defense, providing an extra linebacker for Miami's own pass coverage. With a 2-touchdown advantage, the Dolphin zone was calculated to prevent long gains and make the short ones painful. Number 10, Fran Tarkington, would complete more passes than any quarterback in Super Bowl history. But the swarming Dolphins kept control by shutting off the passes he needed most. Each time Tarkington looked deep, his game breaker was under wraps. Number 42, John Gilliam, drew a stifling Dolphin double team, and finally Tarkington ran out of time. While Miami's 53 defense handled the job of prevention, Don Shula paced the sideline, devising a new plan of attack for his offensive line.
Early in the game, our cross block was effective against the hard-charging Alan Page and Jim Marshall. You could see the concern on the part of the Minnesota Vikings football team when they felt that they were being hurt, yet they knew that they were taking their own responsibilities. Then they started to be more cautious, and this restrained them from charging as hard as they had been charging across the line of scrimmage. When we sensed this offensively, we decided to change our attack pattern to a more straight-on, man-on-man blocking pattern. And when the Minnesota linemen now started to wait to see what we were going to do, whether we were going to cross block or whether we were going to use negative influence and try to get the ball outside, then we were able to get on them in a hurry with our straight blocking, move them off the line of scrimmage, and again enable Zonka to find some running room.
With a change of strategy, the Dolphin running attack now turned to simple brute power. Larry Zonka and his escort, a perfect blend of back and line, man-on-man blocking and man-on-man ball carrying. At last, Minnesota ganged up to stop Zonka, inches short of a first down, leaving Garo Yepremian a chip shot from the 28. Zonka and his blockers had padded the lead to 17-0, and with time running out in the first half, the Minnesota offensive line had only one way to go. At last, Talkington found Gilliam deep and uncovered, and suddenly the Vikings were threatening. With time slipping away, Talkington bootlegged his team even closer. With fourth down at the Dolphin 6, Talkington came up 3 inches short, and the Viking bench sent in word to go for it. These are the moments that test the true mettle of a champion. 1 minute, 4 seconds remaining, fourth down, time to dig in, time to reach down, time to find out which team wants it the most. Out of the pile rose the Miami Dolphins victorious. A replay shows why. For an instant, the Vikings had split the Dolphin defensive line, and number 62, Ed White, was leading Oscar Reed to the end zone. But number 85, Nick Bonaconte, closed quickly to meet Reed at the line of scrimmage, jawing the ball loose in first down territory. Miami's Jake Scott decided the issue with a diving recovery. Once again, a key confrontation had fallen to Miami. Minnesota's sudden uprising had yielded not 1 point, and the half ended with the Vikings discouraged and down 17-0. The Miami Dolphins returned for the second half with a comfortable pad and overinflated confidence. On the first play, John Gilliam quickly brought them back to reality. Gilliam flashed for 65 yards, but back upfield, a clipping penalty cost the Vikings 45 yards of field position. The reprieve gave Manny Fernandez and the Dolphin defense a chance to regroup and handle a new Minnesota tactic. Fernandez stacked over center, then Tarkington sprinted out in an attempt to clear Dolphin pursuit. Fernandez never gave him a chance. While the Miami defense picked up where it had left off, Paul Warfield loosened up on the sideline, waiting to add another dimension to the Dolphin attack. Warfield had limped through the first half, acting as a decoy, protecting a pulled hamstring, waiting for just the right moment to cut loose. Now, on Miami's first possession of the second half, Don Shula called his signal, and Warfield exploded upfield. The tender muscle had responded, and natural greatness did the rest. This was a day of destiny for the Miami Dolphins, a day when even their own mistakes could not defeat them. As he drove his team toward another TD, Bob Greasy realized he had forgotten the snap count. He turned to ask his backfield, but they didn't know either. So he turned back to take his chances. Somehow it all worked out just beautifully. Larry Zonka blasted in, and the broken play gave Miami an awesome 24-0 advantage. To Don Shula, the source of this domination was obvious.
When our straight blocking began to become effective, then we realized that we were controlling the line of scrimmage. Now we were the team that was winning the battle up front. But after you win the battle up front, then you have to continue to work for position follow-through. There are some tremendous shots of Bob Kuchenberg keeping his position on Alan Page as the ball moves to the outside. This is what we call position follow-through, and by being able to do this, then Kuchenberg continues to build this wall between Alan Page and the ball carrier.
The Vikings had been pushed around and penalized all afternoon. Finally, their cool veneer wore thin, and angry rumblings began to break through. Down on the sidelines, the game is more intense, more real. Now, although hopelessly behind, the aroused Vikings would strike back in anger at the source of all their frustrations.
Right! Split right! Hey! Hey! Let's go! Let's go, Moose!
Way to stick him, Carl, baby! Better way to stick! Come on, Greasy, get up! Get up!
Let's go, Moose!
Come on, Greasy, get up! We're coming again!
Slide power 21 on one.
Fittingly, Minnesota's last flurry ended in frustration as an offside penalty negated a successful onside kick. At last, the joy of Super Sunday had all drained away. The Minnesota Vikings had been decisively defeated, but it was more a result of Miami brilliance than their own failure. Minnesota had simply met the irresistible force and had been crushed. Defensive end Carl Eller summed it up best when he said, "I have never seen a more dominating team than the Miami Dolphins. All afternoon, I had the feeling that the outcome had already been decreed on high before we even took the field. It seemed I could hear Scottish bagpipes in the distance, keeping time as they came after us, wave after wave, gaining ground so easily, they seemed to be floating in suspended animation." It was a weird, surrealistic scene, as if we were on the sidelines, watching our own struggle, yet being powerless to do anything about it. After a while, it was obvious they could not be stopped. For Carl Eller and the Minnesota Vikings, Super Bowl VIII was a strange nightmare. For the Miami Dolphins, it was a dream of near perfection, a performance unequaled in Super Bowl history. As time ran out, accolades rained down on the Miami superstars. Larry Zonka had convinced the nation of his greatness with a Super Bowl record 145 yards rushing and was named Player of the Game. But there were others who shared at least equally in his accomplishment. 5 anonymous men had turned in a performance of artistry and rare beauty that few who watched the game were even aware of. Yet their coach and teammates knew, in the end, the game ball was in appropriate hands, as the Miami Dolphins, one and all, earned the right to be called world champions.
This NFL Films production has been brought to you by the National Football League. The NFL is online at www.nfl.com.